The discussion had been rolling along smoothly when the lead professor's eyes narrowed, scanning the rows of students like a hawk searching for its target. His gaze moved from one nervous face to another until it stopped on Marcus. "Let's see," the professor said, his tone calm but laced with something sharper. "Perhaps you can help us out." Heads in the audience turned toward Marcus instantly. He hadn't raised his hand, hadn't moved, but now every pair of eyes in the room was on him. The professor's request sounded polite, but there was something in the way he said it, like a chess player inviting an opponent to make the first move, already convinced of the outcome. Marcus looked up, his expression steady. He didn't fidget or glance around for help. He just met the professor's eyes, silent. The professor began to lay out a problem. It wasn't a quick question you could answer with a guess. This was layered, twisted, designed to confuse, the kind of problem that even well-prepared students would need several minutes just to understand. As the question unfolded, some students in the room exchanged small smiles, the kind people wear when they think they know what's about to happen. A few leaned back in their seats, ready to watch. They'd seen this before, the professor picking someone at random, putting them under pressure, and leaving them stammering. But Marcus didn't look away. He didn't even blink much. He listened to every word, his mind quietly turning the pieces over like a puzzle in his hands. What no one realized yet was that this wasn't the start of his humiliation. It was the start of their surprise. The moment the professor called Marcus's name, a ripple moved through the room. It wasn't loud, just a soft wave of murmurs, raised eyebrows, and exchanged glances. Everyone knew what was coming. The professor's tone had been polite, but his eyes carried the unmistakable spark of someone who was about to set a trap. Marcus stood slowly, his movements unhurried, almost as if he had all the time in the world. He didn't look nervous, though most students would have felt their knees shake under the weight of 100 eyes staring at them. Instead, his calmness seemed to puzzle people. Around him, the audience was split into two kinds of spectators. The first group leaned forward eagerly, like they were about to watch a show, curious to see if this quiet student would crash and burn. The second group glanced at each other with sympathetic smiles, silently wishing him luck, but already expecting the worst. After all, the professor who had called him out was famous for crafting questions, so complex that even senior researchers hesitated before answering. The professor adjusted his glasses and posed the question. It wasn't just a math problem. It was a knot of theory, logic, and numbers twisted together in a way designed to confuse. His voice was smooth, but the challenge was sharp. You could almost hear the silent thought in the audience. There's no way he's getting this right. Marcus listened quietly, not interrupting once. His eyes never left the professor, as if each word was being stored somewhere deep in his mind. And when the professor finally finished, Marcus simply nodded. No dramatic gasp, no frown, no sign of panic. Just a quiet acknowledgement, as if the problem was less of a mountain and more of a familiar path he had walked before. The whispers grew louder. A student in the front row leaned toward her friend and whispered, "He's going to freeze." Someone else muttered, "He's probably regretting showing up today." The professors on the panel exchanged the kind of smiles that said they were certain they already knew the ending. But Marcus? He simply took a deep breath. His hands rested lightly on the desk in front of him, his posture straight but relaxed. In that moment, something shifted, not in the room, but in him. He wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. He wasn't thinking about the pressure or the eyes watching him. All he could see was the problem in his mind, unfolding like a puzzle he had been waiting to solve. And though no one else knew it yet, the real surprise was just beginning to take shape. Marcus rose from his seat, the wooden chair making a faint creak that seemed louder in the hushed hall. Every head turned toward him. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows caught the edge of his face, casting half of it in gold, the other in shadow. It made him look like someone stepping into the spotlight of a stage play. Except this stage was filled with skeptical eyes and sharpened egos. He walked forward unhurried, the sound of his footsteps echoing faintly against the polished floor. There was no trace of nervous shuffling or hesitation. Each step felt deliberate, as if he knew exactly where he was going, and Whiteout, the professor who had asked the question, folded his arms, a faint smirk playing at his lips. To him, this was sport, an intellectual duel he had already decided the outcome of. Around him, the panel of other professors leaned back in their seats, ready to watch the scene unfold. Marcus reached the front and turned to face the audience, his eyes scanning the room for only a brief second before settling on the chalkboard. Without any formal preamble, without even asking for clarification, he picked up a piece of chalk dot. The first mark on the board was confident, smooth, then another, and another. The lines and symbols appeared in quick succession, not rushed but flowing like water down a stream. He didn't pause to think. The thinking had already been done in the space between hearing the question and rising from his seat. Whispers swirled through the room. A student in the second row blinked in disbelief. One professor frowned, leaning forward as if to see better. The problem was notoriously tricky, but Marcus wasn't just solving it. He was untying it with elegance, stripping away the layers of confusion until only clarity remained. Halfway through, he stopped, tapped the chalk lightly against the board, and turned back toward the lead professor. "Here's the turning point," he said calmly, his voice steady but carrying enough weight to silence the whispers. He then explained a shortcut, not something you'd find in the standard solution, but a method so clever and efficient that it sliced the problem in half. The chalk moved again, faster this time, like a dancer spinning toward the finale. Symbols connected, numbers aligned, and before anyone could fully catch up, the answer was staring back at them from the board. Neat and undeniable. Marcus set the chalk down. Not slammed, not dropped, just placed it gently, as if the work spoke loudly enough on its own. Then he stepped back, hands in his pockets, and waited. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of boredom or confusion. It was the silence of a room that had just witnessed something it hadn't expected. Asterisk. The silence after Marcus's first answer was heavy, like the pause before a storm. The lead professor's smirk had faded, replaced by a look that was harder to read, a mix of surprise and stubborn pride. Around him, the other professors exchanged glances, their earlier amusement replaced with curiosity. But for the lead professor, this was not over. His voice, when it finally broke the quiet, carried a deliberate edge. "Impressive," he said, the words slow, measured. "But let's see how you handle something harder." A low murmur rippled through the audience. It was clear to everyone that the professor was raising the stakes. He wasn't satisfied with being surprised once. He needed to push Marcus into a corner to find the limit of this unexpected talent. From his stack of notes, the professor pulled a problem so advanced that it was rarely attempted outside specialized research. It wasn't just complex. It was a tangle of abstract theory, multiple variables, and hidden traps designed to confuse even the most skilled mathematicians. He read it out loud, each word deliberate, as if placing down pieces of a challenge he was sure no one could solve so quickly again. Some students shook their heads. "That's impossible," someone whispered. Even one of the professors on the panel raised an eyebrow, as if silently questioning whether this was fair. But the lead professor's gaze was fixed firmly on Marcus, waiting for hesitation, waiting for the crack in his confidence. Marcus didn't flinch. He listened as calmly as before, letting the question settle in his mind. Then, instead of moving to the board immediately, he stood still for a moment, his eyes slightly narrowed, not in confusion, but in quiet calculation. The pause was short, just long enough for the audience to hold its breath. And then, with a small nod, Marcus walked back to the chalkboard. This time, his pace was quicker. He drew symbols and numbers in precise strokes, moving between different parts of the board, as if mapping out a strategy invisible to everyone else. His method wasn't the slow, step-by-step crawl most students would take. It was sharp, efficient, and layered with insight. Halfway through, the lead professor's arms slowly unfolded, his posture shifting from confident to alert. Something in Marcus's approach wasn't just correct, it was innovative, bending the problem into shape instead of wrestling with it. By the time Marcus reached the solution, the audience wasn't whispering anymore. They were frozen, eyes darting between the work on the board and the quiet young man who had just dismantled one of the hardest problems they had ever seen. Marcus set the chalk down once again. This time, there was no need to explain. The answer was clear. The brilliance was undeniable. The chalk rested on the tray, but the weight of what had just happened hung in the air like thunder that hadn't yet rolled. Marcus didn't move away from the board right away. He stood there quietly, his hands at his sides, as if giving the room a chance to catch up. The silence was strange. It wasn't awkward or empty. It was full of thoughts, disbelief, and the unspoken realization that something extraordinary had just taken place. The lead professor's lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. His eyes scanned the board once, then again, tracing each line of Marcus's solution. The elegance of it was undeniable. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary steps. Every mark of chalk was there for a reason, like a piece of music where every note belongs, exactly where it is. One of the other professors leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, not in skepticism but in admiration. "That's not the method I would have used," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But it's faster." Another nodded, recognizing the brilliance in the shortcuts Marcus had taken. Shortcuts that only came from a mind that could see the whole puzzle at once. And the audience? They were frozen. Some leaned back slowly in their seats, as if trying to process what they had witnessed. Others stared at Marcus with wide eyes, the way you look at a magician who just revealed a trick that shouldn't be possible. Marcus finally turned from the board, his expression calm, almost humble, as if solving one of the most difficult problems in the room was simply a warm-up. There was no arrogance in his face, no sign that he felt he had beaten anyone. He had simply done what he knew how to do, and in doing so, he had shifted the entire energy of the hall. The lead professor blinked, his smirk gone completely now. For the first time that day, there was respect in his eyes. Real respect. The kind not easily given, especially by a man used to being the smartest in the room. Marcus returned to his seat without ceremony, as if nothing remarkable had happened. But the truth was clear to everyone watching. The quiet student they had underestimated was no ordinary mind. And for the first time, the professors weren't the ones teaching a lesson. They were learning one. The change in the room was almost physical. A moment ago, the professors had been sitting like kings in their castle, surveying the land from above. Now it felt as though the walls had shifted, the ground had tilted, and the quiet student they'd barely noticed before was suddenly towering over the moment, without even trying. The lead professor sat back in his chair, his fingers lightly tapping the armrest. His gaze followed Marcus all the way to his seat. But this time there was no hint of superiority, only thoughtfulness, as if he were replaying the solution in his mind, trying to figure out exactly where Marcus's mind had gone that his own hadn't. One of the older professors, known for being reserved, leaned slightly toward his colleague and murmured something under his breath. The colleague simply nodded, his eyes still on Marcus. It wasn't the look you give a student you want to challenge. It was the look you give someone whose abilities you have to acknowledge. In the audience, the students were buzzing quietly now, their whispers carrying a different tone. No one was predicting failure anymore. Instead, they were sharing glances that said, "Did you see that? And who is this guy?" The feeling had shifted from curiosity to admiration, and for some, even inspiration. After a pause, The lead professor cleared his throat. "Marcus," he said, his voice quieter than before, "where did you learn to think like that?" It wasn't a challenge this time. It was genuine interest, almost respect. Marcus looked up from his seat. "I just like seeing the patterns," he said simply. No long speech. No self-congratulation. Just a truth so modest that it only made his brilliance seem brighter. A few professors actually smiled, not out of politeness, but because they recognized something rare when they saw it. The mood had transformed. The panel was no longer a group of judges evaluating a contestant. They were fellow scholars who had just met a mind worth remembering. Word of what happened in that lecture hall didn't stay there. By the end of the day, it had already spread across campus, whispered in hallways, shared over coffee, and retold in study groups with wide-eyed excitement. Some told it like a legend, exaggerating the details. Others stuck to the simple truth. A young black student had walked into a room full of the most respected minds in the university, faced down their toughest challenges, and solved them with ease. The story traveled fast. By the next morning, it was on social media, where a blurry phone recording of Marcus at the chalkboard was gaining thousands of views. The comments filled with words like genius, brilliant, and inspiring. Students from other universities chimed in, saying they wished they could have seen it live. Inside the university, something else was happening, something quieter, but far more important. Professors who had barely noticed Marcus before, now seeking him out, inviting him to seminars and offering him opportunities usually reserved for graduate researchers. The same professors who had once been quick to test him were now just as quick to listen. Marcus never bragged about that day. He didn't tell the story at parties or use it to prove a point. He simply kept studying, kept solving, and kept moving forward. But for the people who had been in that lecture hall, for the professors, the students, and even the ones watching from the back, the memory became a lesson. It was a reminder that talent doesn't always wear a name tag. That brilliance can come from anywhere, from anyone, and at the moment you underestimate someone, you might just be setting the stage for your own surprise. And Marcus? He just kept walking his quiet path, leaving behind a trail of minds forever changed.